We're going to be focusing our second presentation today on SimCreator DX basics. So we are going to talk about SimCreator DX, how to use it, a few explanations on the different modes, as well as when an experiment is, and so on. So let's dive right into it. So SimCreator DX should run on your host computer, or in your case, the operator station laptop. It works alongside SimCreator as the experimenter interface for two scenarios. Using SimCreator DX, you can create, monitor, and control scenarios. Mode selection. After launching SimCreator DX, you'll be prompted to choose between two modes, developer and experimenter. The developer mode is for designing scenarios, and the experimenter mode is for running scenarios. You can treat the experimenter mode as a read-only mode. So you cannot make any adjustments when you're in experimenter mode, but when you are running your scenarios, that is the best place to do it. The purpose of experimenter mode is a quick interface to run multiple participants for your studies. The only functions are needed to run and view the scenarios that are available. So this utilizes the simulation control panel, the plan view, and the status window. The simulation control panel, as you can see to the right, is the tool that we use to load experiments and scenarios, control environment conditions, start, stop, and pause, as well as resuming scenarios, and allow you to activate maneuvers directly using the direct activation window. So we will talk about the different parts of the simulation control panel and also what you can do in each section. So in the pre-run settings, that's the top section, this gives you a drop-down selection for your experiments and scenario. So you guys can open SimCreator DX, open it as experimenter, follow along if you'd like. And the simulation control panel is located on SimCreator DX. So when you open SimCreator DX, you can open it as experimenter. So I'm going to switch my mode right now to switch to experimenter. This is an experimenter mode. As you can see, it's a lot smaller and doesn't have as much information as if I was running in developer. I also have the option here. This is my simulation control panel. So I can activate my simulation control panel here, and this allows me to see my simulation control panel. And then we're going to talk about each one of these sections, so you guys can follow along with all the different sections in the simulation control panel. So, pre-run settings. The pre-run settings is a drop-down selection for the experiments and scenarios. So you can select what experiment you want. It's like the custom experiment that you just made. And then in addition to that, you can select the specific scenarios that you've developed. So we're going to talk about how to create those scenarios, but when you're running in an experimenter mode, you're allowed to select those two things and then set a participant name for data collection as the input. Make sure that when you are setting a participant name, if you're running the same participant through multiple scenarios, that's fine. But if you're using the same scenario, you're running through the same participant, make sure that you change the participant number or add a number at the end of it or something like that, so that you don't lose any data. Are there any questions on the pre-run settings? Okay, so you hit the play button, which is the blue button. It highlights blue once you've typed in the experiment scenario and the experiment participant name. Once you've done that, then you can play the experiment in SimCreator DX. Keep in mind, you need to have Fusion and your model running and SimCreator before you can use SimCreator DX. So hitting play won't actually do anything in this case. Environment settings. So you have a section to adjust the environment settings on the fly. This includes the time of day, weather, and wind. Currently on your model, traction and wind are not connected to the model. However, all of the weather conditions and visuals from that, as well as audio, is connected in addition to the time of day. So if there is a specific thing that you want to adjust, like having a headwind or side winds or something like that, that is something that you can do, and you can find in some documentation as well. Runtime controls. So the last section is the runtime controls. This section gives you a status update of what current maneuvers are being run, as well as maneuvers that you can activate during your scenario. You can add these maneuvers in your during developer mode into the direct activation window, and this also allows the experimenter to look at the simulation time, the speed of the vehicle, as well as what experiment and scenario is being run. And then in the middle you have options to stop, start, and pause. So when you pause a scenario, that will pause the visuals. It will not pause like audio or anything like that, but if there's anything that you want to tell the participant quickly, but without having to actually stop the whole experiment, you can pause the scenario, tell that person whatever you'd like to say, and then resume it so that they can continue on. So that is an option that you have. And then stopping will stop the experiment, and then you can have the option again to load in an experiment name, scenario, and participant name. So the experimenter main window has two views. You have a live view and a status window. The live view allows you to look at the 2D drop down of the world that you've generated. This also gives you information about certain triggers like proximity sensors, vehicles, ambient pedestrians, objects, and everything that you've added into your 3D environment for your scenario. So we will talk about how to create a scenario and stuff like that as well. But in this case, I'm just showing you this is the live view that you see. In addition to that, you can change the viewpoints of your view. We briefly touched on this yesterday, but these are the different controls you can do while you are using the experimenter mode. So you can see that there are some things that are grayed out. That's because this is strictly for the experimenter mode, but you can follow the ownership, which is something that's very useful when you're trying to keep track of where they're going and how close they are to a specific proximity sensor, for instance. You can also rotate the map so that you might always want to be pointed north. The ownership always pointed north. You can rotate the map so you can keep track of it that way. In addition to that, you can fit the world into view or zoom into the ownership. So if you want to zoom into the ownership and get exactly what they're doing right then and there, you can see that, and the ownership is indicated by that red arrow that you can see in all these icons. You also have the option to zoom in and out or use a marquee zoom. So all of these are things you can do in the live view that you can adjust the view that you see. The status window. The status window has multiple tabs. These are divided into different categories. It's very useful for you to track what maneuvers are being run, how long they've been run for, at what time they ran, stuff like that, through your status window. In addition, you can see all the different vehicles that are being loaded into the instance. So if you're using something like a lead vehicle, you can track that lead vehicle in the status window, and you can track its position and its speed and all that. In addition to that, you can look at the traffic lights and other stationary objects, and it keeps track of basically everything that's happening in the world. There are, for the statuses of the traffic situations and maneuvers, they are color-coded. So white means they're not active or waiting to be activated, or that they have been completed. So if you set up specific proximity sensors, they will show up in the traffic situations and maneuvers section, and they will be white until they have been activated. Once they have been activated or they're currently active, they will be green. And then if you are having an issue like an error or something like that, it may turn red. or if it's no longer running, it'll turn red and back to white or something along those lines. So definitely nice to have some type of color-coded indication that something's been triggered when you're using your scenario. So switching over to developer mode. Developer mode is the mode that you'll be using to design your scenarios to fit your study. The developer mode interfaces just like if you were to use the experimenter mode, but gives you full functionality of everything in SimCreator DX. So we'll talk about the different windows and how we can interface and interact with them. So in the developer mode, you still have the simulation control panel, you have the main window, but now you also have something called the toolbox. So we're going to talk about the toolbox because that is something that we use for all of our maneuvers and objects and so on. So the toolbox, so if you want to go into SimCreator DX, I can go to File, Switch Mode, and this will allow me to switch from experimenter to developer mode. So I don't have to close SimCreator DX and reopen it. I can just switch to the different mode here. This will open it up in developer mode. And then if I look on the top here next to the stop icon and this padlock, I will see that there is a little toolbox. It says Show and Hide Toolbox. So I can click on that, and that'll open the toolbox here. And this has similar tabs to what you'll see on the status window with traffic situations, maneuvers, vehicles, traffic signals, obstacles, and actors. So here, this gives you all of the different actors and obstacles that we have in Fusion. That's not the same as what you saw previously in ISA and SimVista. So these are additional vehicles, additional obstacles, and actors that you can use when you're developing your scenarios. So if I go to traffic situations and maneuvers, I will see a few different maneuvers here. You might have some on here that you won't have, like the ADAS ones, since you don't have that package at U of M. However, some of these you'll see to be the same maneuvers that you have on your system for the RDS 100. So you can go in and we'll talk about how these maneuvers work, how to create different configurations, and how to create your own maneuver as well. So I'm going to go back onto here, and that Show Hide Toolbox button, as I mentioned before, you can see that here in this indication. This allows you to open up the toolbox. You'll also see that in the scenario window as well. So we'll talk about the scenario window in just a bit. But this contains all the objects for placement in the experiment. So everything that you want to be able to use to create your scenario, you'll find in here. And you can also add maneuvers to that toolbox from Maneuver Designer. So developer's main window, you get the output window, the console window, the activation window, and then you also get the live view and status window from the experimenter interface. So these windows, we'll talk about the extra ones and what their use is. So the output window is our core output window. So this is actually data coming from SimCreator Core. So this is actually the data coming from the center channel. So when you're running it in developer mode, this is kind of a very useful debugging tool when you're creating your own JS and JavaScript files. If you're having any JavaScript errors or anything like that, you'll see that through the core output window coming from the center channel. So this will give you any warnings, allow you to see any prints and stuff like that in the core output window. You can also go into the preferences of SimCreator DX and change the verbosity level so that you can adjust it to maybe only have sim fatals, or maybe only have an error appear or something like that, or only warnings show up. You can adjust that so that you can keep track of what is going on. Any questions? Okay. In addition to that, you have the console window. The console window allows you to actually send commands, JavaScript commands, to the SimCreator Core and display feedback. So if you want to change, for instance, if you want to change a specific value on the desktop channel of your computer, a static value or something like that, you can actually do that in the console window in real time and get that feedback right away. So if there's like some changes that you'd like to make, instead of loading an in file and running SimCreator over and over again, what you can actually do is input those values into the console window here, and that helps you kind of debug as well. So this also displays any warnings or errors of the SimCreator DX GUI. So when it's connecting with the SimCreator core, if you're having any issues with that, it'll tell you that they couldn't make the connection, and it'll explain what IP address is trying to set and all that. So the console window is another very useful debugging tool for SimCreator DX. The activation window. So the activation window allows you to drag configured maneuvers from Toolbox to that activation window, and then you'll be able to use those as direct activations when you're running your scenarios. So this activation window is the same activation window that you'll see in your simulation control panel. So when you make changes to this window, you'll also see those changes being made when you're running it in experimenter mode. This allows you to, as an additional way to activate a maneuver versus just using a proximity sensor, a time sensor. You also have the option to directly activate it from here. So for instance, instead of having to adjust the weather or something like that, you can add it as a direct activation, and then instead of using the sliders, you can set a specific value, and you can just hit that on the direct activation. So we'll show that as an example as well in the activation window. Yes?
Will the activation be included in the data file? Or it's the same as the drag function, you need to write other script to record the activation?
So, I mean, I guess none of the sensors or anything is recorded in the data file.
You do not write like that component.
Yeah, so you would still have to write that something's been triggered, similar to like adding the sim driver enabled like signal saying that like now AV is on. You'd have to do the same thing on any of maneuvers that you're activating. So.